I want to address the fundamental error of idolatry. What we understood from last time, and we're going to develop a little bit more now, is that idolatry represents a very profound misunderstanding of the relationship between God and his creation. At its core, idolatry ascribes power and independence or autonomy to beings or objects that have none of these things. And what this does is it distorts divine truth and it undermines humanity's direct connection with the Creator. And this will be the problem with any belief system that demands that you go through an intermediary in order to connect to God, as in, no one can come to the Father except through me, if that sounds familiar to you. We left off last time with the idea that the Rambam brought. I'll quote him. He said, "The eternal rock was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, with the exception of a few individuals. For example, uh, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Shem, and Ever." And what he means by that is that for a specific period of time, the recognition of God had disappeared and been replaced with a worship that was directed towards initially what had been considered to be the servants of God, which are the various elements of the natural universe. And at the time of Enosh, who was the son of Seth, it became common that to call out in the name of God, to invoke the name of God in the sense of desecrating the name of God. How do we desecrate the name of God? Through the worship of idolatry. The world continued in this fashion, says the Rambam, until the pillar of the world, the patriarch Abraham, was born. And as we'll see, Abraham restored a belief only in God for humanity. But he was not the first to discover this belief. The original understanding of humanity, monotheism, it's not a novel concept. It's the original understanding that existed about God, about spirituality, about religiosity. From the beginning of Genesis, we see that Adam and Eve knew God directly and experienced his presence in the Garden of Eden, not in any physical sense. This very intimate relationship shows us that humanity was created with an inherent awareness of Hashem and of the unity of Hashem, the singularity of Hashem. That's something that is within all of us. For many, this has become buried under layer upon layer of distorted beliefs. But it is a natural part of the human being. And we see the Torah repeatedly emphasizes all creation existing under the singular authority of Hashem. What about natural forces? The sun, moon, stars, the elements are often described as the servants of God. They fulfill His will. They maintain the order and the balance of the universe. However, the Torah warns us very firmly against venerating them as independent powers. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19, we are cautioned, when you look up to the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, You must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. It's an explicit prohibition in the Torah. Now, the celestial bodies, when you look up in the sky, if you've ever been to a planetarium or if you've ever been to a part of the world where the sky is very visible. I grew up in New York, so I don't think I ever saw the sky in my life, but I have seen pictures. And when you look up there, it's unbelievable how much is there. They serve as instruments of Hashgachas Hashem, of God's providence. And it's not limited to stuff that you can see on a star map. It's the whole natural world is like this, representing the guiding power of Hashem and how he directs the world. But we have to remember that these things ultimately possess no sentience and no power of their own. They are nothing but expressions of Hashem's will, even though they are part of the context of creation into which we've been placed. And they impact our lives tremendously. I mean, if you look around the world, you look at the various different weather-related events, natural disasters, you can see just how hard it can be when you face the natural world, when the natural world appears to be set against you. Recently, we've had these horrible wildfires in California. It's a very big deal. We have people in our group who live there, not in Los Angeles per se. They live in Northern California, but I have relatives in Los Angeles and checked in with them recently. They seem to have been unscathed, but there are a lot of people. I mean, we're talking about thousands of homes that have been destroyed. So they impact our lives. There's no question about it. But we have to remember that no matter what, our relationship with Hashem is direct and without intermediaries. So to attribute independent divine authority to the aspects of the natural world diminishes the unity of our Creator. Now, this dynamic reflects both God's immanence and his transcendence. These are two heavy, highfalutin philosophical terms. When we say that God is immanent, what we mean is that his will sustains and directs every aspect of the natural world. That's what we call hashgacha. Sometimes we call it hashgacha klalit. Sometimes we call it hashgacha pratit, depending on what its scope is. But we know also that Hashem is transcendent because he exists beyond all creation. He's completely independent of creation. Ancient civilizations didn't understand this. They didn't understand this balance. They saw natural forces as divine in and of themselves, and that they embodied only the immanence of these forces without recognizing their ultimate source in a transcendent creator. For example, the Sumerian civilization where Abraham and his family lived, that's the world he came from. That's a very good example of the human tendency to deify natural forces. They had a pantheon of gods, and they included Anu, the god of the sky and the overarching authority in their pantheon, like the big god. And there was Enlil, the god of wind, air, and storms, associated with the earth's atmosphere. Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation, which we link to rivers and fresh waters. There was Nana, which is the god of the moon. Utu, god of the sun and justice. And Inanna, goddess of love and beauty and war. These deities personified natural forces and celestial bodies, and they were an attempt to explain, but also to honor the workings of the natural world. This is directing the attention to the various different elements in creation as a mode of worship. But this practice illustrates the fundamental error of idolatry, meaning mistaking the created for the creator. When people ascribe divine power to these entities, the Sumerians and other ancient cultures diverted proper worship away from the one true God. And I'm talking about human history up to the time of Abraham. We're not even talking about the Greeks. We're not talking about the Romans. We're not talking about various other pagan civilizations that existed long after this. But I want to underscore, the incredible contribution that people like Noah and Abraham made, and why they are responsible for the fact that we are all sitting here today. Of course, human-made idols, which are crafted from wood or stone or metal, really epitomize the folly of idolatry. Under like Unlike the natural forces, which act according to God's will, we can kind of see how people could impute godlike qualities to a thunderstorm. But unlike those forces, human-made idols have no power, no purpose beyond their material composition. We look in the book of Jeremiah, he critiques this idea. In chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, verses 3 through 5, he says, "For the customs of the peoples are delusion. It is but a tree cut from the forest, shaped by the craftsman's chisel. They cannot speak. They must be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can do no harm, nor can they do any good. It's just a lump of wood, clay, rock. There's nothing in it." The very act of creating an idol, of building one, the very fact that you have to go about designing it and building it and cutting it and chiseling it, that just shows you how completely impotent the thing is. The craftsman determines its form, and the idol remains dependent on human aid. If the wind blows, it falls over. You have to create a stand for it so that it stays steady. I mean, Jeremiah actually speaks about it. How you have to steady it so it doesn't totter. And to worship such an it's amazing. I think that those of us today, it's very hard for us to understand how people could have worshiped these things, how people could have imputed any power to them. That's very difficult for us to understand, but it was an absolutely universal practice in the time of Abraham. To worship such an object is to reject the truth of God's infinite and unparalleled existence. Now, Abraham, who was the forefather of the Jewish people, and in a certain sense, the spiritual forefather of all humanity, because he really was the only one at that time who managed to find the truth in a world of falsehood. He is the example of the intellectual and spiritual journey away from idolatry towards the worship of one God. As the Rambam describes in Hilchot Avodat Kochavim, Abraham began questioning the beliefs of his time, realizing that natural forces and idols could not be responsible for the order and the harmony of the universe. And these reflections led him to the truth of a singular creator. He says that he watched the sun rise and fall every day. And it's just that first step of wondering if this thing keeps moving like this, what set it in motion? Rabbi says, ultimately, he appreciated the way of truth and understood the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. Sometimes all you have to do is think. A lot of people are deluded into all sorts of spiritual concepts because they don't really subject them to the test of logic. We'll get into faith some other time, but just logic. He realized that there was one God who controlled the sphere, let's what we'll call that he created everything, and that there is no other God among all the other entities. And Abraham's journey was not merely personal, as we read in the Torah. It says, "Es hanefesh asher asu b'charan." The Torah tells us that Abraham converted the men and Sarah converted the women. What were they converting them to? They weren't converting them to Judaism in its current codified form. They were converting them to a faith in Hashem. He actively taught others. He debated idol worshippers. We know the story about how he was nearly burned in a furnace for the crime of smashing the idols in his father's shop. We see in the Medrash. And he also spread the message of one God. And we see that his efforts laid the foundations for future generations to understand and uphold the singularity of Hashem. I also want to point out, because in a sense, the term monotheism is a bit of a misnomer. We have a verse in the Torah which says as follows. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35. It says, Ata har ladat. You have been shown to know Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that the Lord is God, He alone is God. Ein od milvado, there is none beside Him. Now that's not a great translation. Ein od milvado means something a lot deeper, and it's something that we really have to put our seatbelts on if we want to think about this in order to comprehend it. Not that we're going to come to comprehend it per se, but Ein od milvado means not that there's no one else besides Him. It means that there is nothing besides Him. It's not the belief in one God. It's the belief that there is only God. And that the world that we live in is a very demonized version of reality. In other words, we live in an illusion. We live in the illusion that we are independent of Him, and that the world that seems to revolve around its own axis is independent of Him. It's a famous concept of divine non-intervention that people have, that God is like the potter who makes the vessel and then brings it to the market to sell and walks away and has nothing else to do with it after that. We don't believe that. We believe in a constant and unending involvement of God in the world. But that's also that in and of itself is like the reality obscure. The reality of the world is ayin, is that there isn't anything other than him. So it's actually it actually goes further than monotheism, right? Hashem is not special because there's only one of him. Like sometimes you'll have things that are more expensive because it's the only one in the world. So it has higher value. Hashem's value is infinite. Hashem is infinite. If Hashem is infinite, that's all there is. So we're so now we can really understand why idol worship diverts people away from any truth. Idolatry often stems from a misplaced attempt to honor God indirectly. The Rambam explains that early idolaters rationalized their practices by claiming that they were honoring God's creations as an extension of honoring God himself. And this flawed reasoning led to the construction of temples, the offering of sacrifices, and the worship of celestial and natural entities. And over time, these practices detached entirely from their original intent and culminated in outright idolatry, completely separated from God. And we talked about this in the last shiur. Maybe we'll put a link to that shiur in the description of this video. This mistake is all about attributing divine will or power to anything other than God. Anything other than God. And in a certain, let's say, to sort of understand this not so much literally, but in a more free sense, when you read the news and you see who seems to have so much power, who seems to be the one making things run in the world, money makes the world go round, um, fame, celebrity, whatever it is, we have to understand that that's nothing. That's not what's running anything. All these people that sit at the top on the pedestal, the people who are known by all inhabitants of the earth by name, are not actually the ones who are sitting in the driver's seat here. Right? When we when we attribute divine will or power to anything other than Hashem, we create an intermediary. Intermediaries fracture the direct relationship that humanity is meant to have with Hashem. So it not only distorts spiritual truth, but it undermines the moral and ethical framework that we derive from our belief in one God. But that belief restores clarity and purpose to human existence. It affirms that God alone is the source of all life and the source of all meaning and morality. By rejecting idolatry, Noahides return to the original faith of humanity, which is the inherent direct relationship and the belief in the one true God that has existed from the beginning of creation. Rejecting idolatry restores the clarity and purity of that relationship, untainted by intermediaries or distortions. Noahides play a crucial role in preserving and teaching the principle of God's unity. You have to realize that you have a very, very important mission in the world, both collectively and as individuals. By understanding the fundamental error of idolatry, you can articulate the dangers of attributing anything, power to anything other than the Creator. And this will strengthen your spiritual practice. It will ensure that your service of God remains pure and untainted by misconceptions. And so next time we will delve into the technicalities of the laws pertaining to idol worship and their application and explore how these principles translate into practical observance. For now, let us be blessed to sharpen our understanding and our relationship with the one true God.